All right, welcome in everybody to a special edition of the College Hoop News Podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Tony Patelis. We are actually live tonight. Myself and my guests will be breaking down the bracket. Lots to talk about. We're going to talk the best games, possible upsets. We're going to share our Final Four predictions, all types of stuff. It's going to be a lot of fun. So let me introduce my guests real quick. I'm sure you're familiar with all of them. They've been on the podcast quite a bit this year. First up, we have Kevin Sweeney from CBB Central. His Twitter handle is CBB_Central. Great follow. A lot of mid-major stuff, but covers all things college basketball. Eli Boettger is on with us as well from Mountain West Wire. He also has a blog, hecheckscbb.com, excellent site. And just real quick, too, Eli just released a book called Bracketology, the Science Behind the NCAA Tournament Selection Process. Really interesting read. I believe you can find that on Amazon. So definitely check that out. And also Rocco Miller's with us from bracketeer.org. You can find him on Twitter at RoccoMiller8. So welcome in, everybody. Welcome in, viewers. Thanks so much for joining. And let's get right to the initial thoughts in the bracket. Do you have any big issues? Who got in, seeding, anything? Kevin, we'll start with you. How did you feel about it?
It was kind of a weird selection show with the release by alphabetical order. I kept realizing that a team was out, and then it was just strangely unclear cut with the alphabetical system. I would say the big thing that kind of stood out to me, and I think it's going to stand out to a lot of people, is the inclusion of Syracuse. I think that's the one that a lot of people are going to talk about in terms of being right on the cut line, and I believe they were the last team in, if I recall correctly. But certainly that one really stunned me. I thought there was a few teams that really deserved it, and then once again, the mid-majors, and I think this is a tough thing, and we've seen it pretty much every year. So it wasn't something that was unexpected for me, but to see a Middle Tennessee State not get in, to see a St. Mary's, even though I don't necessarily feel sorry for St. Mary's not getting in, given their scheduling, it's really tough for me to watch these teams do, especially Middle Tennessee, who did it right all season, and then not get rewarded by the selection committee. It's just. I'm kind of at a loss for words. I mean, I'm not surprised that Middle Tennessee State didn't get in because they don't have that that great win. They have a couple of quadrant one wins, but not anything that's like incredible. It's just a frustrating thing for me as a fan of the sport that team won't be in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, for sure. Eli, what do you think about this?
I guess my biggest takeaway actually occurred after the bracket had been revealed. And that was that Bruce Rasmussen, the chair of this year's selection committee, said that Notre Dame was actually the first team that was left out of the bracket. So this obviously doesn't impact the bracket itself, but the fact that Notre Dame, a team that had struggled throughout the year, they were without Bonzi Colson for much of the year, that they were that close to making the field of 68 is pretty stunning to me. Colson was with the team in 2 Notre Dame losses that were just terrible for their resume. Ball State at home, and they also lost to Indiana at a neutral site. But even so, the Irish were just one spot away in the seed list from making the tournament field. Rasmussen said that if Davidson wouldn't have beat Rhode Island today in the A-10 final, the Irish would be playing in the first 4. So that's a huge takeaway for me, and I'll certainly stow this away for the future if we run into a similar situation, and know that teams that do struggle throughout the year and are without some of the best players, they might be in consideration for the tournament field when it's all said and done.
Yeah, and Rocco, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Eli on the Notre Dame thing. When I heard that, if it would have actually happened, let's say Davidson lost today and they got in, I would have been stunned. I didn't even really look at them that hard because they were, like Eli mentioned, they lost to Ball State and Indiana with a healthy Bonzi Colson. And then they have a bad road record. They didn't have any wins against the upper echelon of the protected seed list, top 16. So that would have been horrible. But some of the other takeaways, I was really surprised that Texas Tech landed on the 3 line with West Virginia on the 5. I think what that told me is that they didn't even care about the Big 12 tournament. I thought they were really even going in, and with West Virginia's win over them, that had them ahead of Texas Tech on the seed list for me and a lot of other people that I saw out there. So I was surprised by that. I'm slightly bothered that TCU is a 6 ahead of A&M. I am glad that they had A&M above Arkansas on the seed list. I did a lot of diving on those 3 teams. but TCU getting up to 6 above them just shows that they gave them a lot of credit for the sweep over Baylor. Otherwise, A&M had them beat kind of in all the categories I look at, which is record against the field, strength of schedule, what they did away from home. And then I also noticed that Providence not getting above the 10 line, even though they are 34th on the seed list, is also disappointing. I thought they had at least earned their way up to the 9, even 8 area with the win over Xavier and a win over Creighton the first day of the tournament. So all those examples just kind of show they ignored, for the most part, these conference tournaments, and it's a little disappointing.
Yeah, I agree with you. One team I wanted to ask you guys about is Michigan State. I know Eli is probably happy about this. Michigan State gets a 3 seed. I think there was quite a few people pining for them to be a 2 or even a 1 this late in the season. I just didn't see it. I didn't think they had the resume to stack up with the other top seeds. Where did you guys have them on your line, Eli and Rocco?
I guess I'll begin. I had Michigan State as my final 3 seed in the number 12 position, and I guess it just comes down to quality victories, and Michigan State just did not have many of them. They beat North Carolina in the PK 80 back in November, and they also beat Purdue in February, and that is just about it on their team sheet. So although they finished the regular season with 29 wins out of a power conference as well, it just isn't enough to warrant a top 2 seed, and some were pining for a number 1 seed. So I guess to clear the dust, I don't have anything against Michigan State, but the people that believe the Spartans could end up on the 1 line, I think weren't looking deep enough. And it's not to say that Michigan State isn't a top 5 team. I think they certainly have a chance to run the table and win it all, but there isn't enough on that schedule, and they didn't even schedule that difficult this year. Their non-conference strength of schedule was in the 200s, so just not a lot of meat on the bones. And I think that's why you saw Michigan State as a number 3 seed in the bracket reveal in February. They didn't have any wins over tournament teams since the bracket reveal, and that's why they remain a number 3 seed on Selection Sunday.
All right, Rocco, what are your thoughts about Michigan State? Where did you have the Spartans?
Yeah, I had them number 11 overall on the team sheet, so really similar to Eli. And the reasons have been there, I think, throughout the season. Just like he alluded to, we're looking at a team here that only beat 2 teams that are in the field. Granted, they're both good wins. Neutral North Carolina, home Purdue. Nice win, shows they're capable, especially when they beat North Carolina by 18 in the in the beginning of the year, the PK 80 championship game. But they just didn't have the opportunities. They went 8-4 in the top 2 quadrants. When you stack that up against the other teams in this area, they're kind of blown off the sheet a little bit. You look at a team like Tennessee, who won 11 games in the top 2. They had wins, 3 big neutral court wins. They had a win at Kentucky. You start to break it down, and then you look at that strength of schedule at 217. It's very clear after a while that they belong below. And then I also put Michigan just barely above them, because even Michigan has 6 wins that are against the field, and they're all against pretty strong teams. Neutral, the 2 wins against Michigan State, of course, both away from Ann Arbor, the win in Austin, Texas, the home wins over Ohio State and UCLA, and the Purdue neutral court win for the championship game. So, I had Michigan State 11, Michigan 10.
Kevin, where would you have had Michigan State, in your opinion? Is the 3 line okay with you?
Yeah, 3 line sounded just about right for me, Tony. It's interesting because I don't really see a team that I would put over them in terms of like a 2 seed. That would be less deserving than Michigan State. I thought maybe Cincinnati, although once I look back at the team sheets today, I was pretty sold that Cincinnati was a little more deserving than Michigan State. I think it came down to, if Michigan State could have made a run in the Big Ten tournament and won that tournament, maybe they could have snuck onto that 2 line, maybe even the last 1 seed, although I significantly would doubt it. I think they probably would have gotten onto that 2 line though, and instead still on the 3. They didn't beat anyone, as the guy said before me, and so certainly a dangerous team, not a team I'd want to see in a 3-14 or going forward in the tournament. But I think the seeding is justified given the resume.
Yeah, I think they did get a pretty good draw though. I don't really see TCU, Arizona State, or Syracuse, if they get by Bucknell in the first round, giving them a big game. Maybe, but I don't think so. I think Michigan State is going to get to the Sweet 16 fairly easily. So before we get into the bracket breakdown here, Eli and Rocco, why don't you share how you did on your brackets if you'd like to? Eli, you can go first.
Okay, I'm trying to pull up real quick. I know off the top of my head, I did whiff on one of the teams in terms of inclusion. That was Syracuse. I did not believe the Orange had enough on their team sheet to warrant an at-large bid. I had USC instead, and the Trojans didn't have that many quality victories. I believe RPI-wise, their best win was a neutral site victory over Middle Tennessee, who ended up not being in the tournament field. So I wasn't surprised that USC missed, but I am a bit shocked that Syracuse did make the field. They were the first team out of the tournament last year. So I missed on one team. I think the biggest misses that I had were with Oklahoma, who I was off by 2 seeds. I thought the Sooners would get an 8 seed. They ended up with a 10. And also Kansas State. I missed the Wildcats by 2 seeds. So those were the big misses for me.
All right, Rocco, how'd you do?
Yeah, I also missed on Syracuse, which is frustrating because at the start of the week I had them in, and I just thought with all the bubble teams, I was looking at 9 teams for 4 spots going into the weekend for the most part. I thought with them going into the ACC tournament and getting a chance to play North Carolina and just really not showing up, they got blown out. It kind of in my mind started putting them on the back burner and just starting looking closer at teams like St. Mary's. And I had USC in. I would have left USC in, I think, no matter what. I think they're the highest RPI from a major conference to be left out. If I'm not mistaken, they're 34th. And so pretty surprised by that. I know that they didn't have the marquee wins. In fact, their best wins were, New Mexico State and some of these road wins in the Pac-12. But they did some things that I think the committee didn't really respect. They're the only team in the Pac-12 that went on the mountain trip and got the sweep. The only team in the Pac-12 that went on the Oregon trip and got the sweep. And, this I think in some ways the committee may have looked at the Pac-12 as a mid-major this year, like they have in the past with the American Conference and the Mountain West, just based on the fact that it was one solid team in and then a couple teams around the bubble, more than a couple actually. So that was a little surprising that they didn't get in. And then I also, with having USC and St. Mary's in, I ended up missing both Syracuse and Arizona State. And I struggled today. My last spot was between St. Mary's and Arizona State. In the end, I just thought the 66th overall RPI and the way that I know playing down the stretch doesn't matter, but I just thought it was enough of a bad taste in the mouth that they would be the team that would get zapped out with the Davidson win. But it didn't work out that way. It was actually Notre Dame, which is a big surprise. And then overall, I think, I was surprised Nevada got as high as a 7. I got them on the 8 line, so I was only within 1 seed line there. But, I just didn't think they had a better profile than teams like Seton Hall. And, so that was a bit of a surprise. And I mentioned Providence earlier. I was a little surprised they were down at a 10, but it looks like they had a 9 on the seed list and actually did some readjustments, which is the first time they've done that, I think, in the last 3 years.
Yeah. Speaking on St. Mary's, Kevin, did you have any issue with them being left out of the tournament?
Not really. St. Mary's is a team. I kind of went on a Twitter firestorm after they lost to BYU, basically on the fact that, yes, I think when you watch them, they're an NCAA tournament team, but the resume is just super thin in terms of quality wins, and that's something we know the committee desires. And not only did St. Mary's not have quality wins, it wasn't a situation where someone refused to play St. Mary's. St. Mary's refused to play teams. St. Mary's refused to play Nevada in Reno as part of a home-and-home series. They refused to play Rhode Island as part of a home-and-home series where they'd get Rhode Island at home this season. And they also refused just a few minutes ago, I think it was
Creighton.
Yeah, they refused Creighton. That's what I was about to say. They refused several games against quality opponents where they could have had a chance. And I sit there and I ask Randy Bennett, why would you do that? This was a team that was expected to be top 20 in the country this season. And they should have been doing what a team like Wichita State or a team like Gonzaga has done in the past, which is load up in the non-conference and trying to give themselves as much margin for error in the conference tournament as possible. Instead, they lose to BYU in the conference tournament, led by two tremendous players in Yoli Childs and Elijah Bryant, and they find themselves on the outside looking in. And I don't blame anyone other than Randy Bennett. I mean, sure, it sucks that they're not in because I think they could have made some noise, and sure, it sucks that a team that wins 28 games doesn't get into the NCAA tournament. But when your entire non-conference schedule is played 45 minutes from home or at home, except for your neutral court event in Southern California, which is such a challenging trek for Northern California St. Mary's, and then they lose 2 games in that event. I don't feel sorry for them in the slightest. Certainly wish they had a chance to make the dance, but they just didn't deserve it for me.
They do it to themselves, like you said.
Yeah.
They have opportunities and they don't take advantage of it. I don't know why. It's kind of mind-boggling, especially if you play Nevada, it's not a long trip. I mean, it's a pretty short trip, so. They just don't want to play on the road. They don't want to play anybody on the road, it seems. All right, so let's get into these. Yeah, go ahead, Rocco, if you want to share.
Yeah, I just want to jump in because, Kevin, I completely agree with what you said about St. Mary's, and I thought for sure they were going to be out, and then this ended up being a last-second thing where I started comparing them to Arizona State and Syracuse and Louisville and some of the other teams close to the bubble, Middle Tennessee, and the reason I ended up talking myself into it is just because when you don't have that many opportunities, but like you said, it's St. Mary's fault for that. The only other thing I could think of to break the tie was predictive metrics, which they had much better than the rest of the bubble. And that's what ended up convincing myself to get them in. But overall, I completely agree with you, and I'm not disappointed that they're out, just to be clear on that.
All right, so let's get into these brackets. We're going to break down each region. We'll give you our thoughts on each part. And first of all, you're ranking the regions. From what I saw on social media, it seems like the South is the best region. I agree with that. I think you could make a case for the East as well, and then you have the Midwest and West. I had it Southeast, Midwest, West from strongest to weakest. What do you guys think, Kevin? Why don't you share first?
Yeah, I completely agree that the South is definitely the toughest. I'll actually go with the Midwest as number 2, just because of the top end of Kansas, Michigan State, and Duke. I don't think that got enough attention with all the discussion about the South. But the idea that top 3 is all in one region certainly going to be fun. Although it is weighed down, I think, by the 4 and 5 seeds in Clemson and Auburn. I think 2 of the more vulnerable on those seed lines. I think most of us would somewhat agree on that one. And then I would say the East with Villanova and Purdue and Texas Tech. I think that one's been a little underrated just because I think Purdue is a little bit better than a lot of people think, and Texas Tech certainly a very dangerous club. And then I'll wrap it up with the West at number 4. I think that's a pretty manageable one for whether it's North Carolina, Xavier. I could see Gonzaga making a run as well.
Eli, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I, for the most part, echo what Kevin said. I would definitely go South as the most challenging region, and you have some quality teams there. I think a Virginia-Cincinnati final would be really intriguing, especially from a defensive standpoint. Then I'd go Midwest. I think Kansas, Duke, Michigan State are all legitimate Final Four contenders and could legitimately cut down the nets. And I think East is not that far behind Villanova. I mean, they would be my selection as a title pick right now. And I do like Florida, who's a number 6 seed. There always seems to be one team that makes a run that isn't a top 4, top 5 seed. I think Florida has a great chance to be that team this year. And then the West is probably the weakest region in my eyes.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. So number 1 seeds, Kansas in the Midwest, Xavier in the West, Villanova in the East, and Virginia in the South. Did you guys have those 4 as well?
I did, yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Yep.
And would you guys have any issues if Duke got on that one line? Kevin?
Yes.
Yeah, resume-wise, I would say that they didn't deserve to be on that one line. I thought North Carolina had the most intriguing case with the total quadrant 1 wins. Although overall, to me, it was a pretty clear group of 4 for the 1 seeds.
Yeah, I agree. So let's start out with the South region, probably the best region in my opinion, and everybody's that I saw tonight. Virginia is the number 1 seed. You have some really intriguing matchups in the first round. Kentucky and Davidson, I really like. And that second round matchup, we could have Kentucky and Arizona in the second round. That's probably one of the best NCAA tournament games of this year, in my opinion. The bottom, you got some teams too, though. You know, Cincinnati's playing really good basketball. Tennessee as well in the bottom of that bracket. You got a really sneaky good game, Miami and Loyola. So there's a lot of interesting matchups and some possible upsets in this bracket as well. What are your overall thoughts on this bracket, Kevin? What stands out to you?
Yeah, I think you have to look in terms of the standout is that potential Kentucky-Arizona matchup over the weekend. That has a chance to be all kinds of fun with Kentucky playing as well as they are right now, as well as Arizona coming off that Pac-12 tournament championship as well. But I mean, I think one of the things that stands out to me is that bottom half, as you mentioned, is going to be so tough to predict, and some potential for defensive slugfest. You know, Cincinnati's an excellent defensive team. Nevada and Texas, if Texas can play that game at their pace, that could be a very slow-paced game as well. Texas can keep that score down if they can beat Nevada. Potential matchup with Cincinnati. Tennessee's a team that likes to grind it out a little bit. And then Loyola's a really solid defensive club. They like to get up and down, and they can certainly score the basketball, but they played tremendous defense, you know, throughout the Missouri Valley tournament. So from that perspective, I think it's really interesting. I think there's a really good chance for that bottom tier to be just as exciting as the top, even if it doesn't maybe have those blue blood power names.
Yeah, you know, Loyola is a top 5 scoring defense team in the country, so there's a lot of good defensive teams, as you said, at the bottom there. Eli, what are your thoughts on this bracket? What jumped out to you?
Yeah, I think that Kentucky and Arizona, as you said, that potential round of 32 matchup is huge. Those are probably 2 of the top 5 most talented teams in the nation. And I think whoever wins that one has a solid shot at likely beating Virginia in the Sweet 16 if everything comes together. I always like to keep my eye out on the teams that are maybe in the preseason top 5 or top 10 that regress as the season goes along and then start to pick things up. And I think Arizona and Kentucky both fit that agenda because the Wildcats are playing excellent basketball. I mean, both of the Wildcats, I guess.
Yeah.
And I think that you have to take a look at them for maybe an Elite 8 run. I'm not completely sold with Virginia as a Final Four team, although they could certainly get there. But if the offense isn't flowing, I think you run into a team like Kentucky or Arizona that could cause some problems.
Absolutely. Rocco, what do you think about the South region?
Yeah, I'm on the same page as both Kevin and Eli here. I think Virginia's got a nice little path to get to Atlanta. I can't see Creighton or Kansas State giving them. I mean, maybe Kansas State can give them a little bit of a problem if Wade's back, but I like Virginia to get there. And then Kentucky Arizona looks like a really good matchup. I was pretty stunned, and I still haven't gotten an answer as to why Arizona's in Boise and not San Diego. But I think it might be because they pre-sold all the tickets in San Diego, so the NCAA wasn't as worried as putting the Wildcats at their close to home destination of San Diego. But needless to say, they are in Boise, and it's going to be exciting. They'll sell the tickets out now if they were having trouble with that in Boise. I'm not sure if they were. And with Kentucky and Arizona, these are 2 teams that we knew had top 10 talent coming into the year. They had issues, especially Arizona in the Bahamas and Kentucky throughout the year. And then as we look down in the bottom half of the bracket, I'm excited about Loyola Chicago. I've been following them close all year, as I know Kevin has. This Miami matchup is very interesting. I'd love to see the Ramblers advance, and I do see Tennessee getting out to Atlanta. And then a Cincinnati-Texas second-round game could be really ugly if you like offense. But it should be well played defensively, and I would imagine Cincinnati can get out of there. So across the board, pretty decently strong.
Yeah. Kevin, question for you. Buffalo is a team that I really like. We've talked about them quite a bit this season. I thought they could be a possible upset pick. I just don't like this matchup with Arizona. DeAndre Ayton, I think, is going to eat this team alive. What do you think about Buffalo's chances against the Wildcats?
Yeah, it's really a tough matchup.
Really
one of my
tough.
best friends actually does go to Buffalo, and I texted him as soon as that came out, and I was like, terrible draw.
Yeah.
I just don't know how Buffalo handles the size. They're not all that great in the front court, where they kind of thrive as having really athletic guards who can create off the bounce, shoot the 3 pretty well. So they'd have to I think they'd have to really light it up from 3 and just kind of handle Ayton. I mean, it's not a good matchup from Arizona because I'm playing a really good team. But to not only be on the 13 line, where I think Buffalo had a really compelling case to be a 12, especially with their RPI number as good as it is, but to have to play Arizona, really just a tough draw for them.
Yeah.
Not much more to say than that.
Yeah, Buffalo's a team I was really high on, and once I saw that matchup pop up, I said, "Uh-oh, they're going to be in trouble." So, Eli, you're the Mountain West guy. What do you think about Nevada's matchup with Texas?
I think Nevada has a good shot against Texas, and that's not to say any bias, but I think the Wolfpack, if they're shooting as they usually do, they can put up points in a hurry, and Texas just does not have the scoring punch to match. The Longhorns really struggle from the perimeter. They're 328th against D1 teams from beyond the arc, and Nevada, we saw it in the Mountain West tournament. Although they didn't have the end result that they would have hoped, they can put up a 9-0, 12-0 run via three-pointers like it's nothing. So I think you have to probably take them in the round of 64 matchup against Texas. But once their matchup with Cincinnati, that's a team that is just so strong defensively and is playing excellent basketball right now. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if Nevada is able to escape the round of 32 if they do make it that far.
Yeah. Okay. So who is your Final Four pick in this bracket, and who's possibly – give me a sleeper that you think you can make a deep run in the tournament. Kevin, why don't you go first?
My Final Four pick is Virginia. This is going to come as no surprise to everyone
who knows
my affinity for these Virginia Cavaliers. I just think I saw that bracket and I said, wow, this is going to be tough. But I think they'll match up okay with Kentucky. I really question Kentucky's ability as such a young team to have to handle that experience and that constant pressure that Virginia makes you play under because of how focused you have to be not to make any mistakes and take care of the basketball. So Virginia is my Final Four pick out of there. In terms of maybe a little run or a upset, it's tough for me. I don't really see too much crazy happening. I think Loyola Chicago does beat Miami. I'm pretty comfortable in that upset pick right now. I think that was a pretty great matchup for this Loyola Chicago team. I think they could probably give Tennessee a bit of a run for their money, although I think I'd have Tennessee winning that ball game. And I think Davidson's actually a tougher matchup than you might think for Kentucky, just because they run such good offense. It's another question for Kentucky. Obviously, they have the length, but will they be disciplined enough defensively to not fall for some of the stuff that Davidson runs in terms of being just so efficient and sound with their offensive game plans in the half court?
Before we go to Eli, Kevin, I wanted to ask you, this might not happen, but Tennessee is a team I really like. I think they're going to make a deep run. How does you're great with matchups. You know these teams really well. How does Tennessee match up with Virginia, in your opinion?
With Virginia, it's an interesting matchup, and it's the matchup I have in my Elite Eight. And I spent a little bit of time on it. Obviously, this has been kind of a run-through bracket, but I spent a good bit of time kind of staring at that matchup and saying, what do I like there? I think they match up well in that they have the athletes a guard. If you're Virginia, if you're Tennessee to try to make that upset pick, I think where I struggle though is they don't have a guard that I want to put the ball in his hands and go make a play. And if I'm playing Virginia, I want a guy who can go get me a bucket at any time. Grant Williams is such a solid player, but with the pack line, it becomes difficult to find him in great spots to create off the bounce. He's not a guy who's going to create off the bounce too much, more of a guy who's going to catch in the mid post and do his damage that way. So I don't love the matchup if I'm Tennessee, but I think the score would certainly stay low, and Tennessee's comfortable in that setting. They won't get flustered or frustrated by that tempo. So I think from that perspective, it's a solid matchup, although I would pick the Cavaliers in that ball game.
All right, Eli, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I'm leaning towards Virginia getting out of this region when it's said and done. I have mentioned countless times that I worry about Virginia when they're matched up against teams that have a lot of talent, and they run into that in Arizona and Kentucky. But Virginia is just such an efficient team, and they just time and time again they find ways to win. It's hard to count out a team like Virginia, especially with a coach of Tony Bennett on the sideline. So I'm going to take Virginia to escape the South region. And if I'm looking at a sleeper, I do like Miami. There's something about the Hurricanes that intrigues me. If they are able to hang on and beat Loyola, which is certainly a good upset choice, I think Miami has the roster that could get it done. And by get it done, I mean at least win a couple games. We've seen what Lonnie Walker has done as the season has progressed. Jaquan Newton adds some talent on this roster. So Miami is a 6th seed that we could see win a game or two.
Yeah. Is there any updates on if Bruce Brown is going to return this year too?
I just saw he's out for the Loyola game. Larinaga said no shot he plays against Loyola. I think he's a doctor's appointment Monday, though, so maybe he could come back for the second weekend if they can get that far.
All right. Rocco, your turn, buddy.
Yeah, so I'm taking Virginia as well. I like Virginia to play Cincy. I know, shocker, right?
Shock.
That's right. Yeah. No, not necessarily. I'd say, I like Loyola Chicago as well as a sleeper, but since that's already been covered, I will say, don't overlook Davidson. I know Kentucky's playing right at the right, well at the right time, but so is Davidson. That's a team I got to see in person this year against Dayton in January. They didn't play very well. They lost at the buzzer. And they have really turned it around the last month. They're the highest rated KenPom team in the Atlantic 10 right now. They passed Rake and, of course, beat them today. So, they come in feeling good, nothing to lose. And against still a young team from Kentucky, I can either see Kentucky making a deep run or just losing right here in the first game. So watch out for the Wildcats.
All right. I'm not going to go chalk like you wimps. I'm going to go with Arizona. I think this team is pissed off right now. DeAndre Ayton's playing like a man possessed. I love the way this team's playing. Alondra Trier's back from his debacle. So I love this. I think Sean Miller is going to coach his ass off in this tournament. I like the matchups for them as well. So I'm going to go with Arizona in the Final Four. I think I also like Miami as well, especially if Brown can come back. I just love the way Lonnie Walker's playing of late. He's really come on. I know he had that knee injury early on. I think that really slowed him down. But ever since conference play started, he's been playing excellent basketball. So watch out for the Canes as well. So, it looks like Virginia's the hot pick, but I think Arizona and even Kentucky. Kentucky's a team that I like as well, but I think, their experience factor comes into play a lot in the NCAA tournament. So I would lean Kentucky, but I like the experience of Arizona a little bit more. So let's move on here, guys. We're going to move to the East region. Obviously here, Villanova is the number 1 seed. Got some really interesting matchups. I think West Virginia, Murray State is going to be one of those upset type pick games. And then if we could get possibly a West Virginia Wichita State matchup in the second round, that could be great. The bottom of the bracket, there's some interesting matchups. Arkansas Butler's kind of a tale of two different teams, the way they play. Texas Tech, Keenan Evans is the story here. I think, we just don't know how healthy he is, how well he can play in this NCAA tournament. That's going to be interesting. What do you think? What are your thoughts on this region, Kevin?
Yeah, this is an interesting region for a lot of reasons, just because I really like that top 3. I think Texas Tech is a lot more dangerous than people think. I've got a couple of upset picks in there, one that I haven't really seen anywhere else. I'm picking Marshall to beat Wichita State. It's kind of the one that doesn't make a ton of sense if you're just going to go out there and say, which team is going to pull an upset, because I just don't really feel like Wichita State is that vulnerable a team, but I just have a really good feeling about this Marshall club. They're playing excellent basketball. They're going to have to keep Penova out of foul trouble because he's so important for them to protect the rim. But when you're looking at teams in March, you want a team that they can score with excellent guards, and they certainly have that with John Elmore and Burks. That's such an outstanding duo. But in the Elite Eight, it's going to come down for me to the top 2 seeds. Once again, I'm being boring and going somewhat chalk here, but I'm going to pick Purdue to come out of this region and knock off Villanova. I think they present a really interesting matchup for Villanova in terms of being able to space it out with 4 guys who can put it on the floor and then 1 big guy in isolation like Isaac Haas who can make plays down there. I think that size can bother Villanova, and it'll be a fun matchup, but I'm rolling with Purdue right now in the Final Four.
Kevin, I think Purdue got a pretty good draw, at least to cruise to the Sweet 16. I don't see Arkansas or Butler giving them much trouble. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I certainly do. I think I saw someone say that Arkansas was a good matchup because they have Dan Gafford, and I certainly like Dan Gafford. I think he has a bright future, but I think he'll get manhandled by Isaac Haas in a one-on-one situation in the post. I think Arkansas's chance there is to just get the game into such a frenetic pace that it causes Purdue to get out of sync offensively and forces them to play an up-and-down game. But I don't think that's much of an upset chance. And then Texas Tech will be a dogfight if Texas Tech can make it to the Sweet 16. But I definitely do like Purdue's draw overall in this bottom half of the East Regional.
Yeah, I like your Marshall pick, Kevin. I do. I think John Elmore is a guy that can take over a game and win a game for a team like Marshall if they play well defensively. I thought they played pretty well defensively yesterday against Western Kentucky. Marshall's obviously known as being an offensive team. Eli, what are your thoughts on the East?
I think Villanova ends up winning this one. Another chalk pick, of course. I think Villanova wins each of their games, at least their East Regional, by at least 10 points. I think they won't have any troubles with the teams that will be in their direction. But the chalk ends there for me. My major upset in this bracket is Stephen F. Austin over Texas Tech, which is a 14 seed over a 3 seed. I think Stephen F. Austin just messes with this game. They like to dirty things up. They don't have any major wins on the year. They did beat LSU, their only power conference victory, but they're playing in their own backyard. These are two Texas teams, and they are playing in Dallas, so it's not like the Stephen F. Austin fans need to travel much. Texas Tech, in my opinion, is overseeded. I had them as one of the bottom half 4 seeds. They're in as a 3, and we just don't know what the status is of Keenan Evans. So I think that could be a trendy upset pick if you are into going off the deep end and selecting 14-plus seeds. That's the one that I'm choosing. And then my sleeper, which is another – it could be an interesting pick. I have Florida, who's in the same pod as Stephen F. Austin. I trust Chris Chioza. He's done it in March before last year. And when this team is running on all cylinders, I think that they're one of the better teams in the nation. They've only been uncompetitive in one matchup this year against Alabama, and they've been pretty good elsewhere. So I think Villanova will beat Florida in the East Regional.
Eli, how do you feel about UCLA? I like this team. I think they're playing good right now. They played well down the stretch to get into the NCAA tournament. You think the Bruins could maybe make a Sweet 16 run?
Yeah, they are playing better basketball, and I always look to those first 4 matches because every year that the first 4 has existed, at least one of those teams has won a round of 64 matchup. But in terms of their potential matchup that they would have in the round of 64 is Florida. I'm just so high on the Gators right now that I don't know if I see that happening.
All right, Rocco, what are your thoughts on this region?
Yeah, I'm going to seem really boring. I feel like my dad right now, but I'll take Villanova. But I will probably mix that up by the end of the week. I just need more time to digest the bracket. However, I do like this West Virginia-Murray State matchup. I think it's incredibly intriguing. I've been waiting for Murray State to knock somebody big off all year. They've come up short in their couple of chances they had when they played Auburn earlier this season. Be great to see the Racers get that victory. And I don't think it's impossible for them to do it. And I don't think it's impossible for them to beat the Wichita State Marshall winner either. So watch out for the Racers down in San Diego. Also, I'm glad you brought up UCLA. I like the way Holiday's playing lately. It was a great matchup in the Friday night semifinal when they went to OT. They had the lead for a lot of that game and then just kind of fell apart in overtime. But UCLA is playing at a high level, and I actually picked them to win the Pac-12 tournament. Like I said, they came up just short. And I do agree that Florida's playing really well at the right time right now. So I just think that Florida-UCLA game could be, for a spot all the way out to the Elite Eight, because I think the winner of that would essentially carry the flag from there. I'm not really high on the way Texas Tech's looked in the last month. Yeah. I agree that Stephen F. Austin will give them a good battle. And then down below, I do think Purdue will make it out to the Sweet 16, but I just got a bad feeling that they'll kind of flame out at some point before they get to the Final 8.
Yeah, if Keenan Evans didn't have a broken toe, I would easily pick Texas Tech to make a deep run in this NCAA tournament. But the way he's been playing lately, he's just very inconsistent. You can tell that's bothering him. I know he's wearing 2 different size shoes as well, so that's affecting his balance, he said. Kevin, how's this game? Virginia Tech and Alabama, 2 teams that are just so inconsistent, in my opinion. This is going to be a tough game to pick, right?
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge. For me, I went back and forth on this one quite a bit. I think I'm just going to bet on Colin Sexton being ridiculous in March and just going to get buckets when they need it. But, I mean, I'm going to have to take a second look at that pick for sure because I really like Virginia Tech. I think this is a team that's very balanced. I think they match up Alabama well in terms of they're not Virginia Tech, not a team with a ton of size. Alabama, not a team that's going to exploit that. They're more of a team that's going to spread you out and use their guards. So I think from that perspective, I thought Virginia Tech actually got a somewhat favorable draw. I think Buzz Williams is the better coach. So it'll be an interesting matchup. I'm actually going to flip right now and say Virginia Tech wins this ball game. Now that as I think about it right here on this show.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go chalk in this one, guys, with Villanova as well. They're the team that I trust the most when it comes to the favorites to win it all. So I'm going to go Villanova. My sleeper pick is UCLA, though. I think they got a pretty good draw. I think they can beat St. Bonaventure, and I think they're going to play a banged-up Texas Tech team in that second round. I'm going to give them a good shot to win that and advance to the second weekend. So should be an interesting bracket for sure. So let's move on to the Midwest here. Kansas, we have as the number 1 seed. We've got a lot of interesting mid-major, high-major matchups, in my opinion, in this bracket. Clemson, New Mexico State's a very intriguing game. I think Auburn and Charleston is as well. This Charleston team is a very good ball club. The bottom of the bracket is kind of Duke and just Michigan State. I think will clearly get to the Sweet 16 in my opinion. What's your thoughts on this, Kevin?
Yeah, I think the one thing that kind of jumped out at me, and I tweeted this out almost right away, was that New Mexico State. I haven't been quite as high on them recently in terms of the way they've been playing, but they look good over this weekend in the WAC tournament. To get to play in San Diego against Clemson, and then the winner of Auburn and College of Charleston, I don't think you could have written a better script for them. I think they'll have a chance to have a really big fan base come and travel. Obviously, still not a short journey, but much closer than you might have, than they could have drawn anywhere else. And then you'll play a team in Clemson that's a little thin up front now without Grantham for most of this season now with the leg injury he suffered. I think Jamario Jones can kind of control this game on the glass, and I'm picking that upset. So that was kind of what jumped out at me right away. In terms of a Final Four pick, it's going to be Duke for me out of this region. I do have New Mexico State going to the Sweet 16, knocking off Auburn as well, so they win that little pod out in San Diego. But Kansas and Duke into the Elite Eight, and rolling with Duke, I just think Kansas will struggle to match up with that size of Duke. I've gone back and forth with this Duke team a lot this season because I'm just not entirely sold that if a team with Trayvon Duval at point guard, especially the way he's struggled lately, can be in a true national title team. But at the same time, I just think it'll be a really interesting matchup to see Kansas try to deal with those bigs for Duke, especially with the way Bagley looked over the weekend.
And we also don't know how healthy Udoka Azubuike is going to be because he's dealing with an MCL sprain. So is he going to play in the first game or the second game? We just don't know that yet. So that'll be interesting to see. Eli, what are your thoughts on the Midwest?
Well, I guess to begin, I've picked Kansas so many times in my brackets in the past, and it has never panned out. So there is no way I'm picking the Jayhawks this year. But I guess for legitimate reasons, you do have to go back to the Azubuike injury. That's certainly a concern. My upset, like Kevin, is New Mexico State over Clemson. Jamario Jones is just such an excellent player. I think he and Zach Lofton could be considered the best two players on the floor in that game. And geographically, it makes a lot of sense for the Aggies to maybe mess around on that pot and win a game or two. I think Michigan State does come out of this region in the end. Duke, I think that they're hit or miss. I think just so much rides on what Grayson Allen does. His splits when Duke wins and loses is just remarkable. When Grayson Allen is on, his team is on, and when he's off, Duke has a tough time. And so I think Michigan State will be able to get out of this region, and that is if Miles Bridges continues to attack. And we've mentioned this countless times that when Bridges settles for jump shots, although he is a good shooter, I just don't know if that helps out the MSU offense. He needs to be a bit more aggressive, attack the basket, and I think Sparty will be okay if he's able to do that.
All right, Rocco, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts are, in the upper half of the bracket, I think Kansas will have a fairly easy time getting to Omaha. I think NC State could give them some trouble if they're playing well. When NC State has shown up in big games this year and pulled off wins, so I would be a little bit concerned if I was a Jayhawk fan just about that matchup. I don't see Seton Hall being able to hang too close with them. In terms of the pod in San Diego, I actually kind of like Clemson still. I keep expecting them to fall completely off the map with the injury, and they played Virginia really tough in that ACC semifinal, and that encouraged me at least to the point where I think they can beat New Mexico State, a team that was really struggling with Seattle University in the semifinal game. I know that they'll have the crowd support, and I think that could help them, and I'd love to see the upset. I'm all about upsets, but I do think if I had to predict, I'd see Clemson actually coming out of there and getting to Omaha. But I am not going to take Kansas overall. I am going to take Michigan State. I think they got a gift in going to Detroit. I thought that Michigan had earned that. But they gave it to Michigan State, and I think they'll fully take advantage of that. Michigan State was my preseason pick to win the national championship, and it seems like they haven't played in a month, so they have no excuses. They come out fresh. This Bucknell team has not been, in their chances to prove themselves in the offseason, they looked horrible. It depends which Bucknell team shows up. If the good one shows up, they could actually give Michigan State a scare. But with it being in Detroit, I think that's just too much. And then I think when Michigan State plays Duke, Duke's had their ups and downs throughout the year. I just think with the game being in Omaha, that's going to probably be a little bit bigger Spartan crowd, a little bit more going for Michigan State, trying to redeem themselves from not having a great regular season. They went 2-4 against tournament teams. So I'll go with Michigan State to get out.
All right, and I'm going to go with Michigan State as well. I completely agree with Eli. If Miles Bridges is playing aggressive basketball, I think that's when Michigan State is most dangerous. He's been doing that more of late, I think. So I like Michigan State to come out of this region. I had a couple questions for you guys. First, for Rocco and Eli, Arizona State is a team that I thought should have been left out of the tournament. They might have had the best first month of anybody in college basketball. They had those 2 marquee wins against Xavier and also at Kansas. Did you guys have them in or out, today? Eli, why don't you give your thoughts first?
I did have Arizona State in my bracket today. They're actually my very last team in the bracket, and that's as far as they've fallen all season long. I remember in January having them, I believe, as my 3rd overall number 1 seed. So it's crazy to think of how far ASU has dropped. I did a bit of a study earlier this year and looked at all the teams that were ranked in the top 5 in the first AP poll of January, and no team has ever been worse than an 8 seed. And you see Arizona State show up as an 11. So that just goes to show you how far Arizona State has fallen over the months. But when they're on and they're hitting their shots, you have Trey Holder and Shannon Evans who can pour it in all sorts of buckets, but the defense is just such a concern. They're 124th in defensive efficiency. And I guess we'll see what happens against Syracuse. But that, if you were looking for first 4 intriguing matchups, I don't know if Arizona State and Syracuse is what you were hoping for.
Yeah. What do you feel about Arizona State, Rocco? Did you have them in or out as of today?
Well, the answer is yes and no. I had them out because when I posted my AM bracket this morning, they were the last team in, and then they were the team that I knocked out because of the Davidson win. So they were right there. It was a real struggle just based on the fact that their RPI was number 66, but you got, of course, the 2 wins over number 1 seeds. It is all about the body of work, no matter when the games happened and no matter how much us as fans want it to be more about how they played down the stretch. It's really not part of the equation. And so I think the San Diego State win actually kind of helped them too, because that continued to become more significant over the weekend. To go along with the Kansas State win and the win at Utah and the UCLA and USC home win. So it ended up becoming, I really wanted it, my heart of hearts wanted them to be out because I know they're not playing well, but I thought that they, compared to the rest of the bubble, had more going for them. And then I let myself talk myself into St. Mary's with the predictive metrics, which was a mistake. So definitely learned from that. But yeah, I thought they were right there just because they did so much in that first part of the year, like you guys mentioned.
All right, before we move on, Kevin, I wanted to ask you about Charleston. This is an excellent basketball team. They have one of the best trios in the game with Grant Riller, Joe Chealy, and Darrell Brantley. What are your thoughts on this team matching up with Auburn, and do you give them a pretty good chance to win this game?
Yeah, it's an interesting matchup for me just because Charleston's a team that I think could have easily wound up on the 12 line had their season kind of gotten off to the way they had expected it to. Jarrell Brantley, who's their big man and maybe their most important player, was out for, I believe, the first month and a half or so. He missed a good bit of time. They had a loss to Cal Poly in that stretch. Had a few games that certainly didn't live up to those preseason expectations. But he's a guy who averages 17 points and 7 rebounds, can shoot the 3 a little bit, an efficient player as well. And then the backcourt of Grant Riller and Joe Chealy. Chealy was so huge in that CAA championship game when they came back from, I believe, 17 down to beat Northeastern. Grant Riller, not only a hyper efficient scorer, averaging almost 19 points a game on 55% from the field and 40% from 3, but also one of the best defenders in one-on-one situations in the country, based on some statistics. So he's a really interesting player. I don't love their lack of depth against this Auburn team. I think I was hoping to see a team like Buffalo that could continue to send bodies at Auburn and be a little more fresh with Auburn not having that depth that you might want. I think Charleston's going to want to slow this game down and keep this and have more of a defensive slugfest versus Auburn, who I think wants to use their athleticism, maybe get out in transition a little bit. I'm not picking this upset right now, but if Auburn continues to play like they did against Alabama in that SEC tournament, I could certainly see them going down to the Cougars here in San Diego and kind of flipping that whole little pod on its head with already the New Mexico State Clemson upset that I've picked.
All right, and final bracket, region we're going to talk about is the West. This seems like the most wide open region, in my opinion. A lot of good teams. Xavier's on that one line. You have Ohio State, and one of the games I'm most intrigued by is Houston and San Diego State. I wanted to ask Eli when his turn comes up here about that game, because two teams that are playing really good basketball, especially San Diego State. Michigan is one of the hottest teams in the country. They match up with Montana. And there's some interesting matchups at the bottom. I think Texas A&M and Providence is a pretty evenly set matchup. North Carolina and Lipscomb. What are your overall thoughts on this region, Kevin?
Yeah, I would agree that it's definitely the most wide open one, with the exception of UNC maybe not having those brand names of college basketball. Like, for instance, we look back at the last region we were on, you had Kansas, Michigan State, and Duke. This one having, Xavier, Gonzaga, kind of some of these like newer powers in college basketball, which is certainly fun. I have Gonzaga coming out of this region with a Final Four, with a championship game, rematch of last year, Gonzaga versus UNC this time. The Zags coming away with it. I just love how they're playing of late. I think they just look so good, and they're bigs. They're one of those teams that I think has the opportunity to really challenge North Carolina because they have so many bigs they can run on them and so much length to go get offensive rebounds and kind of pummel the Tar Heels on the glass, as they've been so good this season despite that rebounding disadvantage. I do have one 12-5 upset here, South Dakota State over Ohio State, another location win with South Dakota State playing in Boise against Ohio State. That's a pretty solid draw if you're South Dakota State, not only because I think Ohio State is a bit vulnerable, and also because the South Dakota State team is really good. Cannot wait for that matchup between Keita Bates-Diop and Mike Daum. My one concern is this is just kind of superstition for me. A few years back, I was all over South Dakota State when they had Nate Wolters. I forget who they were playing. I think it was Michigan they drew in the first round, if I recall correctly. And I pounded my foot that this South Dakota State team was gonna pull the upset behind superstar Nate Wolters, and it didn't happen. Bit of a bad look for me in my ninth grade class, I believe it was, something like that. But South Dakota State, I'm going to roll with them in this upset, as well as Gonzaga making this run all the way. It's going to be a fun regional. I think I think it's pretty underrated because maybe it doesn't have quite the top tier talent, but so wide open. It's going to be a real fun one to watch.
Eli, what are your thoughts on the West? And I wanted to get your take on San Diego State's play of late. They win the Mountain West tournament yesterday. It just seemed like this team took a while to get clicking, and they've certainly clicked the last about month of the season. I know when we did the Mountain West preview, both myself and you were pretty high on this team. What do you think about the San Diego State matchup with Houston and your overall thoughts on the region?
Yeah, I guess going back to what you said, entering the year, I had SDSU as my number 2 team in the Mountain West. There's just so much talent on the roster. You're able to bring back Malik Pope for his senior season, and though he's been a bit underwhelming in his 4-year SDSU career, he still has just an immense amount of talent and athleticism. And SDSU, I mean, they were playing pretty poorly in January and even up to February. They got leveled by Nevada by 83-58 in February. That dropped them to 5-7 in conference play, and they haven't lost since then. They've won a month's worth of games. Trey Kell was just phenomenal against New Mexico, hitting all sorts of big buckets, which has been something he has struggled with in the past. He hasn't always been able to come through in the clutch. And the Aztecs in Brian Dutcher's first year, they're headed to the NCAA tournament. And I think they have a legitimate chance to upset Houston. Although Houston's been playing really good basketball, SDSU you have to make the argument that they're one of the hottest teams in the nation. So when the front court is working with Jalen McDaniels and Malik Pope, SDSU certainly has a shot. So I probably will roll with SDSU in an upset there, but in terms of the rest of my region, I think Michigan makes a deep run. I do like Gonzaga and Michigan to meet in the West Regional, with Gonzaga reaching the Final Four. I think Gonzaga is just so balanced. They have another great big man in Killian Tilly this year, who I still believe is underrated. And then you have Rui Hachimura, who is a guy that I don't think many college basketball fans that watch you from afar know much about, but he's been excellent as well. In terms of upsets, I was interested to see where South Dakota State would land, because I think Mike Daum could just eat a front court alive if he got the right matchup. But I think Keita Bates-Diop and the Ohio State Buckeyes match up fairly well against South Dakota State. So I was going to really match up heavy with South Dakota State, but I don't know if they have enough to beat Ohio State.
Rocco, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just segue from what Eli was talking about with the Ohio State matchup. Ohio State's a team I saw twice this year against Nebraska and Maryland, and very impressive ball club. It's been 2 weeks since they played a game, so there's always that concern they could come out a little rusty in the first half. But they're a very impressive team. Dockage gives them a great spark off the bench when they go into a lull, but Jason Tate and Bates Diop and Wesson's a down low. I don't know how South Dakota State can match up with him. I know the game's in Boise, and that's a bit of a trip for Ohio State. So I just think by the time we get down to the end of the game, Ohio State should be able to pull away and put that away. It would be great if Dom just hits so many shots that it stays close the whole time, though. And then I think Ohio State Gonzaga, which is a rematch from the PK 80, would be a really intriguing game because Ohio State is so much more improved from the last time they met. Gonzaga's gone 2 months with only playing WCC competition. I think that could just be an all-out war. So that's a tough one to predict. I think the trendy pick would be Gonzaga because they're so close to home, but I wouldn't be surprised if Ohio State pulled it off. I like this Xavier team. If they play Missouri with Michael Porter Jr., I just don't think Michael Porter Jr. had enough time to get acclimated. He's a special talent. He's a Seattle high school kid, so I followed him a ton last year. He looked a little lost out there in the court during their one game in the SEC tournament. They really needed to win a game or two to get him up to speed. And I know if they even play Xavier, they got to beat Florida State. From what I could tell, I do think Xavier gets out of that to the Sweet 16. And then down below, San Diego State, this will be their first game in the Central Time Zone. They haven't even gone anywhere past the Mountain Time Zone as far as heading east. So they'll have to get acclimated out there in Wichita. Houston's playing very well. I think it's a really awesome matchup. I mean, these are two of the hottest teams in the country. Looking forward to that game, but I do think Houston will get through. And, Michigan, the way they've been playing, I do like them to get to the Sweet 16 against Carolina. So overall, I will take Michigan actually to reach the Final Four. I know that's going to be a trendy pick. I'll probably change my mind later this week, but that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I want to go. I want to pick Michigan too, but I'm a little interested to see how this layoff affects them because they were red hot. And they won the Big Ten tournament. They haven't played in, I think, 11 or 12 days. It's going to be once they play. So that's going to be interesting to me. I'm going to go with North Carolina. I love their veteran group of May, Berry, and Pinson. I think Theo Pinson's playing the best basketball of his career. I think there's a lot of teams you could pick. I think Xavier, Gonzaga, as Kevin and I believe Eli picked. There's Michigan and North Carolina. Even Texas A&M is a team that has a ton of talent but just hasn't put it together. Maybe they figure things out late this season. So I'm interested. We have two Gonzaga picks. So looking at the Final Four, Eli has Virginia, Villanova, Michigan State, and Gonzaga. Rocco has Virginia, Villanova, Michigan State, and Michigan. Kevin has Virginia, Duke, Gonzaga, and Purdue. And I have Arizona, Michigan State, Villanova, and North Carolina. So I'm sure we'll change these picks about a million times before the tournament starts. But all right, right now, Kevin, who do you got winning it all?
I have Virginia.
Oh, God.
I rode with them from the beginning. I will continue to ride with them. It wasn't something I went out with a conscious effort to do. I don't know about other people, but I've always picked a bracket. I just literally pick each individual game and see where it winds up. I don't come in preconceived with the champion, although I do kind of have the idea of a few teams that I would expect to win. And if it kind of comes out at the end, I'm like, there's no way this happens. Then I kind of reassess. But I have Virginia beating Purdue in this title game. I think Virginia's discipline would again be a challenge for Gonzaga just because they're a young team. I think people don't really realize, obviously, Perkins is an older guy and Tilly had some minutes last year and Williams is an older guy as well, but they're going to be expecting big minutes from Norvell and from Rui Hachimura. I just think it's a really big challenge for them to play a team like Virginia. And then in the championship game, I do have Purdue knocking off Duke. I would love to see that matchup just because I think it'd be really just a fun one to watch in terms of how Purdue and Duke duke it out. I have to really dig a dive on that matchup. I may change Duke to beat Purdue in that ball game. Just kind of have to take a deep dive on the nitty gritty there. But either way, I think Virginia is the better team once again. I've been asked this question so many times throughout the last 6 weeks, and who do you trust most? And right now, I still trust Virginia. If there's 3 minutes left in a tie game, with Ty Jerome and Kyle Guy and Devin Hall and the emergence of DeAndre Hunter, who I think has a chance to be, that star of March Madness that kind of bursts onto the scene and becomes that it factor. I think he has a chance to just have a huge March. They have so many more weapons than we might have thought come preseason, and so for that reason, I'm taking them to finish games. Going to be in a lot of close ones in this tournament, and they're going to have to win in close games, and I trust them to do it as much as anyone in college basketball right now.
All right, Eli, your turn.
I'm going with Villanova. It's the team that I had picked in October. I just think that they're so good offensively, and defensively they're nearly as good at 22nd overall in defensive efficiency. They obviously lead the country in offensive efficiency. Jalen Brunson is a point guard that I trust as much as any other player in the country. We've seen over the last few weeks when it looked like Villanova might drop a game, maybe to, Seton Hall. That was a close one. So they've had some close games down the stretch, and Jalen Brunson just knows how to get buckets. Usually in the lane, he makes some nifty moves. And Michael Bridges, I think, is still an underrated player. He makes excellent plays defensively. He's had so many swats in the final possessions of games in recent weeks. I just think you have to trust Villanova. Their bad shooting nights are other teams' good shooting nights, and for that reason, I think Villanova cuts down the nets for the second time in 3 years.
Rocco.
I also am going with Villanova. So Eli stole my thunder a little bit, but I like the fact that this Villanova team, they play so well together. They're so strong. They don't get rattled. They're going to have a nice little layup playing in Pittsburgh for a couple of rounds, and then Boston isn't far. So I think they have a nice path to get there. And then once they get there, they've got the experience. Brunson is just such a rock solid stud. Omari Spellman, does his thing down low. It's and Bridges, of course, can light it up. So I love, and with Booth back from injury, I mean, they've been back to themselves. So I really think they're poised to make the run. And I'll go with them over Michigan, actually. I don't think Virginia is going to get to the final.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm a Villanova guy too. They were my pick in October. As Eli said, they're my pick now. They're the team I trust the most. Their veteran leadership. Jalen Brunson, you got the best player in college basketball on the best team. I'm going to go with Villanova to win it. I think Arizona is going to get to that final game as well. It's going to be a mountain of difficulty to stop DeAndre Ayton, but Villanova I kind of throw matchups out the window with Villanova because they just seem to get it done no matter who they play. So I'm going to go with the Wildcats. That certainly could change. I'm obviously going to break down this bracket a lot more, but all right, guys, that's going to do it for tonight. We did it in an hour and 10 minutes. That's pretty good, huh?
The only problem is I'll probably take back everything I said in about 20 minutes.
Yeah, same here.
It's definitely tough to make picks as soon as the bracket comes out, but well, that's going to do it for the episode tonight. I appreciate everybody who listened. I appreciate all the guests. Guys, thanks for joining tonight. I really appreciate it. Hope you had a good time.
Thanks for having me on, Tony. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure, Tony. Thank you.
Yeah, heck of a time, Tony. Thanks as always for having me.
All right, guys. Everybody enjoy the tournament. We'll be back probably next weekend with some more stuff. I'll let you know. I'll let you know when we're going to be live and everything. So we'll do a lot of these podcasts during the NCAA tournament. Thanks a lot for joining, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks.